Hello, I'm Tara Brabazon and welcome to the post 12, Valuing Your Late Style. This post comes at the end of our Rejection Trilogy. Remember, we started with Little Hen's request. She just had a PhD application rejected and wanted me to help her improve next time. So we started the trilogy by looking at the application. Last week we evaluated the hurt, the professional and the emotional states through rejection. But I wanted to finish with something much more buoyant and optimistic. Well, buoyant and optimistic for an old goth. And so I wanted to look at late style because I was aware that Little Hen was particularly concerned that she was suffering these rejections in what she described as middle age. So I wanted to address with honesty the nature of age, aging and rejection. And do you notice how often in our culture people are sort of depressed that they're getting older? Well, for me, it's always like better than the alternative, right? Which is death. And I always remember Ingrid Bergman's great, what a beauty, what an amazing talent. And I always remember her comment about aging, quote, "Getting old is like climbing a mountain. You're a little bit out of breath, but the view is tremendous." End of quote. Now, I wanted to finish this Rejection Trilogy by valuing you high. Valuing you, valuing everything that you have experienced in your life and understanding what you've gone through in your life to propel you to a better future. So I want to try and create spaces where we understand failures and successes, but also disappointments and hopes and the relationship between those states. And in many ways, every line on your face, and I've got so many, every line on your face has been earned. And so you've survived, and that's terrific. But the point of this post is to enable you to thrive rather than just survive. And you'll notice I'm in a new location. Yes, the temporary accommodation continues, dear friends, but you'll notice appropriately, and I wish I'd planned it, we've moved into a little tiny Art Deco location. Is there a better place to think about late style and its beauty and its transformative capacity than remembering deco? And yes, I have a fireplace. I'm so excited. So what we're going to do is help you thrive. And one of the ways I think I help you thrive, particularly for the prospective PhD students out there, is I need to remind you of something. We have this notion, this ideology that PhD students are young people. And that is complete nonsense. It is a lie. My last job, the average starting age of PhD students was 40. 40. And most of the PhD students that I've supervised in the last 10 years particularly have been over the age of 60. And yes, a remarkable group of people are over the age of 70. Hi, Kate. Now, most of those PhD students, in fact, all of them have completed quickly. And that's because they balance their experience and their expertise. So the assumption that the best teachers, the best researchers, the best humans are young is absolutely and completely wrong, because it is the combination of experience and expertise that is powerful and indeed transformative. And I'm speaking to this issue not only as a 53-year-old woman, but also as someone who was that young PhD student. I went back and I completed my honours when I was 21 years of age, my research master's degree when I was 23, and my PhD when I was 25. So I was one of those people that went straight from school right through university and loved it so much that I stayed and worked in higher education. But the PhD for me was not an end point in any form. After the PhD graduation, I think I completed 2 more bachelor degrees, 3 more master degrees, couple of graduate diplomas, and a couple of graduate certificates. So each of these qualifications were incredibly meaningful to me in different contexts and different times. And indeed, since I completed that PhD all those years ago, I've produced 20 books and over 250 refereed articles since that PhD. So each of these research events has been a photograph of my intellectual life. So I wanted today to talk with you about the gifts of education, the gift of teaching and learning and writing and research. So let's talk about late style. Late style was a phrase used first, we think, by Theodor Adorno in 1937. So Adorno was a scholar of passions and sort of idiosyncrasies as well. He was particularly obsessed with the work of the late Beethoven. So Adorno was really rocking. And why he was so fixated on the late Beethoven is he was fascinated by the dissonances and the disjunctions that existed in the late Beethoven. And he argued that the complicated nature of the music at the end of Beethoven's life served to, quote, critique the bourgeois order, end of quote. And Adorno used the great phrase, quote, the idea of surviving beyond what is acceptable or normal, end of quote. Oh yeah, surviving beyond what is acceptable or normal. That'll get you going, getting me going. So most of us have these what if moments in our lives. You know, if we'd made this decision, if we went on that path rather than that path, how would our lives have changed? And they are legitimate questions to ask. But what about the more difficult question? The more difficult question. What if we hadn't spent as much time in our lives being quiet, being complicit, being compliant? What if we'd spent more time in our lives being difficult? So Adorno, through his research on the late Beethoven, probed the challenges of not being compliant, of working against or indeed outside of the rules. He particularly was interested in how we transcend our tidy past. Oh yeah. Adorno, therefore, wanted to value the disruption. He wanted to value the catastrophic, hinting that Beethoven at the end was probably nudging into the atonal modernism that was to follow him. So at the end, courage and defiance emerges. So from this origin in Adorno, the legendary scholar of post-colonialism and indeed Palestine, Edward Said, took this area up as a great passion nearing the end of his life. And in fact, he taught a course at Columbia called Last Works, Late Style. How great is that? And from this course, he started to work and put together a book on late style. Now, this was a collection of essays, and quite sadly, but also profoundly importantly, I think, it was published posthumously. So Sayed's work on late style was published after his death. And this book was titled On Late Style, Music and Literature Against the Grain. What a great title. Sayed transforms but also transcends Adorno's work, exploring the shifting meanings in our culture around the word late. think about the word late. So Sayed argues that lateness in our lives is not about harmony or resolution, but, quote, intransigence, difficulty, and unresolved contradiction, end of quote. Oh, this is brilliant. Okay, so the notion of late style critiques the idea that we grow wiser with age. We don't grow wiser with age, but we do grow more reflexive as we age. We understand a bit more. We start to think more, I think, about timeliness, and we know that those notions of progress and being productive, these notions are nonsense. So I'm being productive, I'm progressing in my life. Are you? Well, look, you realise at a certain point, productive doesn't matter. Progressive in your ideas doesn't matter. What's important is timeliness. And also, Sayed was particularly focused on the lie of living. What he argued is that humans die. There's no doubt about that, humans die. But the lie of that death is that our work transcends us. So we die, our bodies die, but our work survives us. Our work continues. So late style, brilliantly, is a recognition that yes, we are all going to die. And if we keep living that life, wanting the permission of other people, you know, living within the rules and the parameters of what we think is acceptable, then we're already dead. We're already dead intellectually or creatively. So therefore, late work is alienated and also alienating. But this late style has something else. It weaves into its time in a truly brilliant way. It is relevant, it is timely, it is contextual. So this late style for Adorno and for Sayed was complex, it was contradictory, it was questioning. I think that's incredibly important. It's agitated. It's also antithetical to any idea of going quietly, which I quite enjoy. And there's no longer a need to be liked or to be understood. So I also wanted to log in our definitional work here the great analysis from the legendary Eve Sedgwick. And she had a bit of a brush with late style in her 2003 book, Touching Feeling. A great book, by the way, I really recommend it to you. And Sedgwick describes, quote, old, brilliant people, end of quote, whether they be artists, whether they be scientists, whether they be intellectuals. And she particularly was focused on the late writings of Iris Murdoch. Yes, Iris Murdoch with Alzheimer's. And Eve Sedgwick argued that Alzheimer's enabled brilliance without apology, brilliance without self-consciousness. Okay, so significantly, Adorno and Sayed, and indeed Sedgwick, applied this notion of late style to high culture, right? So we're looking at classical music, we're looking at literature, capital L. But what about popular culture? What about popular music? Well, think about Bob Dylan's Times Have Changed, the legendary Fairport Convention, Meet on the Ledge, John Lennon's Watching the Wheels, David Bowie's Black Star, anything by the Pet Shop Boys after the Behaviour album, and obviously I just have to say two words, Leonard Cohen, and remind you of his two late albums. You Want It Darker, and Thanks for the Dance. Brilliant. Now, I could write for the next 30 years, if I live that long, I could write for the next 30 years about late style and popular culture. This is such an emerging, exciting, engaging area. It is rich and powerful. And look, this should have been big. Late style in popular cultural studies, in popular memory studies, should have been enormous. It should have been a big part of cultural studies after the Birmingham Centre sort of petered out in the 80s. But it hasn't been. Instead, sort of late style's been used a bit to do a bit of pretty basic textual analysis on pretty basic texts. So to give you one example of this, Richard Elliott wrote a book titled The Late Voice. You think, this is going to be great. It's on time, it's on aging, it's on experience in popular music, but it's not a great book. It was based on his doctoral thesis, but he wasn't able to lift or add complexity from the thesis to a scholarly monograph. But there's no doubt that popular culture gives us incredible capacity to think about loss and death and meaning. Think about your late voice, whatever your age now. Think about your late voice and how it is developing. Now for you, late voice may be about chronology. It may be about you thinking about this moment in your career. You could be performing a lateness beyond your experience. It could be a retrospection, looking at your life so far. It could be writing about loss, writing about grief, writing about despair. And it may, of course, also refer to the work that surfaces after your death, so posthumously. So work out which definition of late style suits you now. Therefore, if you think about it, every single one of us at different points of our lives has a late style. And basically, a late style is reflecting on where we are now, where we've been, and what's going to happen next. Late style asks us to think about experiential time, not chronological time, but a reflection for all of us on meaning, on our purpose. Now, Proust described aging as, quote, embodied time. Oh, I love that. Embodied time. That's what aging is. We don't measure time, we feel it. Yeah. So this means our experience is intensely subjective and very deep. Life scratches at us. It wounds us. It leaves those marks on us through the grain of our voice or through the anger and despair and confusion in our prose. This wounding by time can create wildness, weirdness, or fabulous interpretations of who we are and also what matters. Late style, remember, can appear at any point in your chronological life. So it's about when we summon, when we consider, when we think about the threat, the promise, perhaps the opportunity of death. And this is not about age. Remember the impossibly young Joni Mitchell singing Both Sides Now. Wow. Right to the posthumous album from the legendary Leonard Cohen, Thanks for the Dance. So these late styles ponder place and ponder displacement, time and loss, and the passing of time and the losses that we've all experienced through the passing of time. Now, one of the best recent uses that I've seen of this Adorno Syed interpretation of late style comes from a great scholar. I think this is one of the great books I've read in the last 5 years. And this is Leah Cardos's remarkable book, Black Star Theory, The Last Works of David Bowie. Now, David Bowie lived a life of art and experimentation. And it's not surprising that his death was also about art and experimentation. The Black Star album, unbelievably, was released 2 days before his death. But if we look at the late work of David Bowie, noting when he died, if we look at the clustering of that work, we've got The Next Day that was released in 2013. We've got the off-Broadway play Lazarus that was released in 2015. And of course Black Star that was released in January 2016. And if we cluster that late work, it is remarkable in so many ways, because you can see the power of being courageous in really strange times. Now, obviously, very, very few people knew that Bowie was ill. Now, the idea that something that important could be hidden from our publicity machine and Twitter is stunning. You know, we live in an age where when Kim Kardashian changes lipstick brands, it becomes news, right? But Bowie withdrew all publicity from these projects. So at a time that everybody is selling everything, Bowie made a decision to step back from the publicity, and he said nothing to the media. He also moved further and further away on the edges of popular culture. Now, we need to know that Bowie's done that through his entire career. Think about the Low album. Bowie always problematized the relationship between popular and unpopular culture. You know, we've got to think about, you know, the Low album is a truly great example of that unpopular culture that became popular culture. But his late career was no serious Moonlight tour. This was no Let's Dance at all. So late style is dealing with death. It's dealing with endings. But it's also this odd combination of art and culture and life, building it together in new ways, different assemblages, if you will, of platforms and media. The challenge, of course, with late style is none of us ever know precisely when we are going to die. What is late style? We never know if this work is going to be a late work or it's going to be our last work. So it is that propulsive awareness of time, the propulsive awareness of endings, and how our past and our present meshes. And understanding that meshing, that is what creates greatness. And this is not greatness of nostalgia. This is not a romanticised past, but a gritty, defiant, difficult, and often a pretty ugly past. And often it's about our unwillingness to participate in our sanitised, simple culture. Basically, we are all becoming our own living archives, sitting in emotional detachment, confusion, perhaps despair, but living and thinking about writing and reading. And this has intensity. Oh yeah. This has layers. Zygmunt Bauman probed the space between what he described as bodily death and social death. Good on you, Ziggy. Because he argued so much of our lives live on beyond our bodily death. For all the scholars out there, when the body goes, we continue to live as scholars in footnotes and references and bibliographies. Research is made by researchers who know that we are dying. We know that we're living, but we know that it's going to end. And that self-awareness can give us courage and power and meaning and reflection. So whatever your age, whatever the chronology tells you, whatever age you are, the person that's watching this, do have a think today about your late style. It's a gift. Because what a late style is it confirms that you know who you are and you know what is important. So whether you're a first year undergraduate student, whether you're a PhD student, whether you're a citizen, you have clear expectations about your relationships with other people. You understand the relationship with your teachers. You understand your relationships with your supervisors. You don't put up with rubbish. You don't put up with rubbish assumptions. You don't put up with platitudes. You don't put up with nostalgic commentary about the good old days in higher education. Trust me, I was there. They were not good old days. There were times when students had their publications ripped off by their supervisors and senior colleagues, and a time that buried sexual assault and sexual harassment. These were not good times. But you also know, you have that understanding. Why are you enrolled in a degree? Why do you believe in the power of research? Why do you believe in the power of reading and thinking and writing? Your late style is making a statement about who you are and also about the next steps in your life, while understanding all the steps that got you here. Never allow anyone to make you feel small, make you feel insignificant. You are important. Your research is important. Your life is important. And you confirm that importance by understanding your late style. I wish you love, light, and peace. Tea out.